As you're probably aware, in President Biden's State of the Union speech last week, he referred to an undocumented immigrant as an illegal.
Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of thousands of people being killed by illegals?
There was immediate backlash from his base, but in an interview given on the tarmac outside of Air Force One the next day, Biden seemed to double down, saying, quote, technically he's not supposed to be here. But pressure from within the party seemed to force an apology during a sit-down with MSNBC's Jonathan Capehart on Saturday. Let's take a listen.
During your response to her heckling of you, you used the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Lincoln Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country. The reason our economy is growing. We have to control the border and more orderly flow, but I don't share his view at all.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
Now, Donald Trump weighed in on Biden's State of the Union performance over the weekend, slamming it as an angry, dark, hate-filled rant before making fun of Biden for repeatedly tripping over his words.
2 nights ago, we all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant of a State of the Union address. Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together.
Trump also blamed Biden for Lincoln Riley's death, saying Biden's neglect of the border was the proximate cause of her murder. He also criticized Biden for walking back the use of the term "an illegal."
He's really said some bad things today, and we'll get into that. He said some really bad things. But one of the lives that was taken from us was an incredible 22-year-old nursing student right here in Georgia, Lincoln Riley.
What do you make of all of this, Robbie?
I think it was a huge mistake for Biden to so carefully emphasize that he used the not PC language to refer to this murderer. I don't know who that makes happy. Does that really win back over progressives who are mad about him, everything else? It certainly alienates, I think, not just, conservatives don't like him anyway, but polls show right now major dissatisfaction with Biden's handling of the border and of immigration. Trump massively favored in polls on that issue specifically. This seems like the exact kind of thing that was, workshopped by very out-of-touch, woke, elite media people, like the worst sort of comms people that, I'm so sorry I called him illegal. It's undocumented. Who cares? It's a murderer. So
a lot of people care. I think the analogy that I heard someone make was someone can do a vicious murder and they can be black, but that doesn't mean it doesn't say something about me if I call them the N-word, right? Or I'm black, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. The fact that if you believe that you shouldn't use certain language about people because it's offensive, because it's otherizing, because of their status isn't the issue, the fact that they're a murderer is the issue. The fact that someone's black isn't an issue, the fact that they're a murderer is the issue. And when you start to use certain kind of language to describe people, it starts to suggest that you are dehumanizing or trying to cast aspersions on a group that they belong to, as opposed to one individual's actions. So I hear you saying that it obviously doesn't bother you, but it is absolutely not true that Biden's base wasn't extremely upset about this. And I'm not talking about the left, who frankly is over him to begin with. I'm talking about liberals. Remember, Democrats ran against Donald Trump largely on Biden being an improvement on the what was perceived as distasteful messaging around immigrants and Latinos specifically. Ever since the beginning of his they're not sending their best kind of colloquy, regardless of whether you think that's a good argument or if you think that Donald Trump was perfectly justified in using that language, Democrats have framed themselves, both in 2020 and now, as an antidote to what they see as the kind of xenophobic ugliness that Donald Trump represents. So for Joe Biden to use identical language to that which has been criticized coming out of Donald Trump's mouth collapses the distinctions that Biden is trying to make between him and his opponent. And that on top of all of these other points at which he's disappointed his base, whether it's student debt, whether it's on climate, whether it's on Gaza, the argument that was made back in 2020, I am so much better than the alternative, I'm restoring normalcy, I'm getting the ugliness out of politics, doesn't land so well when you are erasing those divisions through your language. And I will say this, the best case scenario, I agree that walking it back is cringe because you end up in a place where you've made everybody angry. The best case scenario is for him not to have said it in the first place. But this, I think, gets to the bigger problem of Joe Biden, during the State of the Union, was visibly flustered and thrown off when there were interjections from the audience. That's the opposite of what happened back last year when he actually had one of his best, most cogent, on his toes moment when he was going back and forth with a Republican in the audience. This time, it seemed like he was not actually quick on his feet, and it highlighted this bigger issue, which is his mental competence and age.
Yeah, I'm not ready to let the illegal immigrant argument go. I think it's the most common way people refer to it. It wasn't until recently considered offensive by some. I'm looking up the legal terms in U.S. immigration law. They use illegal alien, unauthorized alien, undocumented alien, illegal immigrant. Like, it's not consistent in the documentation. I support making it easier to immigrate to the country. I don't agree. And there's also something funny about, Biden having many of the same policies and, in fact, trying to get very right-wing policies, not right-wing enough for many on the right, which is why they voted against them, but say, the word choice, the phraseology is the problem rather than the underlying policy. Alex Nowrasteh at the Cato Institute, who is very, very much on the wants more immigration, is usually put up on TV as like a foil to people who are hawkish on the border, says that he thinks this entire debate over what term to use is a complete distraction and we should focus on the policy, not that most people think of the term as illegal immigrant and you're trying to Yeah,
well, I agree with that, obviously. Yeah. But it's that we're having a conversation about the language. I would also say this. It's not that he called this man an illegal immigrant. That's one level of, okay, you're right. A lot of people interchangeably use illegal immigrant. Even frankly, I found myself doing an immigration episode recently where, there was no other way to describe someone, we were talking about a situation where an American was deciding whether or not to help someone who had clearly just done an illegal border crossing. And I don't know how else you describe that other than the implications for the American only attached because the guy had broken the law. And we were talking about a legal situation. That being said, and illegal is different. That's like when people start to say a black. You know that there's a different kind of implication to that sort of a thing. So I think that it's not just that if he had just said an illegal immigrant, I think most people would have let it go. It felt like a more pointed kind of othering that whatever you think about it and whatever the right thinks about it, his core base, and again, not the left who's frustrated with him for a whole host of reasons, but his core base was really deeply frustrated because it feels to them, I think, like the rug has been pulled up out from under them because the whole point of getting on board with a Biden project, a generic Democrat, that's who Biden was in 2020, was that a generic Democrat at least knew how to talk about immigrants in a way that didn't feel like it was sympathetic to the kind of messaging that comes from the right.
And I don't know, that's fine. I would like to see some polling on how even Democrats feel about this term. I was trying to find some and I couldn't pull it up. I would be interested to know more about exactly which Democrats were put off by this. It might be the case. But anyway, it does feel like an unnecessary, yet he could have just used the term, if he didn't want to offend people, he should have just used the term, whatever he wanted, or written, just gotten around it somehow, just not done that.
Well, let's also make sure we understand the context. The context was that I think it was Marjorie Taylor Greene had shouted about the young woman whose family was in attendance and they were passing out buttons with her name on it.
And he had one.
Marjorie Taylor Greene had given him one when he was coming into the room. And so he was attempting to basically validate in some ways Republicans in the audience's concerns and the family's concerns about obviously having dealt with the tragedy of their daughter having been killed. So the irony is that he was trying to throw a bone to Republicans.
Yes. Well, and he threw it to Republicans.
You're right. To everybody who I think understands that this is a horrible tragedy. The question is whether or not Biden's immigration policy or any immigration policy whatsoever can be blamed for that particular tragedy. And moreover, whether or not using or emphasizing that particular tragedy cast a pall on the true statistics about undocumented immigrants and their crime rates, which is that they are Americans are twice as likely to commit a crime as undocumented immigrants are. And does something about the way this is being framed obscure that reality? I think those are the concerns that are being managed here. And Biden just completely stepped in it, which again is this question. Can he get through a whole campaign season if in one little colloquy with Republicans in a pretty sterile environment throws him off his game so much that one of the most covered stories out of the State of the Union is him having to go on this apology tour, which I think you're right. Just it's going to make everybody upset.
Everybody's upset. That's the story of Biden's 2024 campaign so far. We'll have more Rising right after this.